Today's guest is Farmer Paul Grieve. Paul is the founder of Pasture-Bird, the largest pasture-raised chicken operation in the world, focused on making true pasture-raised and nutrient-dense chicken more accessible and affordable, and reintegrating animals and crops in a regenerative closed-loop system. He and his wife, Lindsay, live in Temecula, California with their 4 young children and almost 30 members of their extended family. Now, what you might not know is Paul never set out to be a farmer. Paul's farming journey began after contracting Lyme disease from a tick bite during his Marine Corps sniper training. After he got bit by that tick, he experienced joint pain, brain fog, and decreased performance, which is really common with this autoimmune condition. And then after returning from Iraq in 2009, he and his family started eating Paleo to help his condition. They then grew frustrated with the lack of pasture-raised meat available in Southern California, specifically chicken. And in 2012, they ordered 50 chicks and raised them in their backyard as a fun project. They were mimicking their mentor, Joel Salatin. They raised the birds in mobile coops on pasture, moving them every single day. What they didn't realize was the strong need for this pasture-raised meat in Southern California. There was a large community of people looking to buy these. And after, the birds sold out immediately and the business started to take shape, especially when the LA Lakers and LA Dodgers players became their first wholesale accounts. Since then, the business has taken off, and Paul is on a mission to educate as many chicken farmers across the nation on how to make pasture-raised chickens not only affordable and accessible, but in a regenerative way that not only heals our soil, our planet, sequesters more carbon, but increases the nutrient density in our protein for our family, especially our children and the future generations. I'm so inspired by Paul and Lindsay and the community they've created, the good they're putting into this world, and it's such a pleasure to introduce you to Paul and Pasture-Bird in the hopes that you have a better way of taking care of your family and the planet as well. Let's welcome Paul to the show. All right, you guys, I've been so excited about this podcast since my farm tour of Pasture-Bird. I'm obsessed with the whole Grieve family, not going to lie. But we're having Paul on the podcast today because his little passion project turned into a huge operation of regenerative farming of chickens. And I'm so excited for him to tell his story, his health journey, all of it. So Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kelly. I love your family too. This will be fun.
I mean, Bash still talks about the farm tours. So, you let us know if you need summer workers and we'll just forget those child labor laws and we'll get to work.
It was like a homecoming for him. It was like where he's always just meant to be. So
right. I mean, I do feel that way with kids, I'm like, how do we get them earthing and unschooling and all of that stuff. The worst is picking up a toddler from preschool and going like, he looks so drained. It's the worst feeling.
Well, you remember when we were out there, I mean, there was a point like towards the end when you guys were hanging and I think our kids were a half mile away and they were just like having a great time on the other side of the farm. And I remember you guys kind of being like, oh, that's actually really good for a toddler to have a little independence, be able to like run around and play without their parents right next to them and stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool. Our kids get to experience that a lot. It's really special.
It is so special to have that place for your family to go and like just the land around your home and your farm and really getting nature. I mean, something I definitely craved over the pandemic. I was on Redfin, like Montana, Idaho.
Yeah. You and everybody else fled California and moved to Tennessee to get 5 acres, right?
Right. I mean, my sister went to Austin. I feel like there was a big move there too.
Definitely.
But it is really special. They were throwing dirt clods at each other, like a good half mile away from us. And, and it's just like that joy where no toys, nothing. And they've found a way to make and play games out in nature, which was like really special to see. So, and just to see the regeneration you've created on that land. I mean, for people that don't know, it was this barren piece of land. How big was it? Or how big was it?
165 acres.
Yeah, why don't you explain the changes that happened to the land, and then we'll go back and start from the beginning.
Yeah, sounds good. So when we first got out there, it was a barren potato field. So it had been in conventional potatoes for about 50 years. And potatoes are notoriously one of the hardest crops on the soil because they basically need to give chemo to the ground every year that they want to grow potatoes. So not only are they using like synthetic, fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide to grow the potatoes, they have to do what's called fumigation, which is where you pretty much come in and just cook all the life out of the soil on the conventional potato side. So when we got there, not that it means a lot to other people, but we were less than 1% organic matter. And when you stepped into this dirt, your boot would just drop like a foot down into this sandy, it was hard to call it soil. It was like dirt, we got out there, and even after some pretty healthy rains and seed and all that stuff, we were just getting little like sprigs of weeds and not really any grass. But by, our whole process about reimagining animals as assets to the environment instead of liability. So by using the poultry and rotating them around the field and bringing their manure, which is like the best organic fertilizer in the world. Now, 7 years later, it's like this really beautiful spot with tall grass, and we have to use cattle to like keep the grass mowed down and all that. But it's taken a long time to get there too.
I mean, it's mind blowing to me just to see the pictures you had prior to like when you purchased it to when we were there, because I made the mistake of wearing like California sandals to the farm.
You made your rookie mode on the footwear.
Yeah. My kids were in boots. Chris was in Vans.
Yeah, they were. Like, that's true.
But the kids had it down, but the grass was easily like knee high for me in places, which was insane to see. I could never believe, looking at the prior pictures, that it's just amazing what you've created. So we have to start from the beginning. I mean, you were in the Marine Corps. You've had, you have Lyme disease. This was like a passion project turned major operation. Can you start me from the beginning? You're an athlete. You're in the Marine Corps. What do you want to be when you grow up? What are your passions?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up like a really normal kid in downtown Seattle, and I didn't think about food or farming at all. Like you remember growing up in the 80s, 90s, it was kind of just mom would swing by McDonald's after baseball, and like we would just do that thing, and we didn't really think anything of it. And I don't fault my mom for that at all. I think it was just a different time, and like we didn't really think about it as much unless you were really hippie fringe, but we were just normal people growing up. And then I was an athlete my whole life, played sports through college, and then I went into the Marine Corps after college, and I was in sniper school in Virginia. And in that school, you kind of have to like hide out a lot. So you're laying down in the backwoods of Virginia, trying not to move for a few days. And there's so many ticks there. And so one of the risks is like, it's no big deal to get bit by a tick, but if it has Lyme, then you can have some complications from it. So one of the 80 something that I got bit by had Lyme, and I got the full bullseye rash. And it was shortly after that I started feeling bad, like feeling really crappy. So brain fog and fatigue and like back pain and knee pain and all these weird symptoms that I'd never had before. And I just tried to manage it through Motrin. We call it vitamin M in the Marine Corps. We just pop a few Motrin and like move on with life,
Mm-hmm.
And thank God, this was around 2008. Paleo CrossFit was like getting to be a big deal in the Marine Corps around that time. And so like Rob Wolf and Lauren Cordain and like Mark Siss and all the old school guys,
the Godfathers.
Paleo podcast was like firing back then and all that. So I just thought it sounded kind of dumb, and I'd never thought about how what I was eating would affect the way that I feel. I've just never connected those two dots before. And some really good buddies were just like, dude, just give it a try. 2 months, 2 weeks to a month. And if you don't feel any better, just drop it and like, don't even think about it. But after about 2 weeks of eating paleo in 2008, like instantly I could breathe through my nose again. And that was not a thing for a long time. I had like the brain fog just felt like it was lifted, My back pain was starting to go away. I didn't have any knee pain and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, the first time, I think I was 23 or 24 years old at that point. It was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense that the food that you're eating would change the way that you feel and sleep and perform and all this different stuff. So that was pretty much the start of it. My wife got on the same kick. The rest of her family kind of went on this like paleo journey around that time. And when I came back from Iraq, we were pretty deep in it. We were looking for high quality food. So it was like organic produce and pasture-raised meat. Those were the two things that we were pretty dead set on finding. And we could pretty much find everything at our local health food store and at the farmer's market. So all the organic produce, grass-fed beef, pasture-raised, all this stuff, but we could not find pasture-raised chicken. And it was like this weird thing. They didn't sell it at the farmer's market or anywhere. And this was about 2012 now. And we were sort of sitting around, our family gets together a lot, and we were joking about, well, what if we just raised our own chicken? Like my in-laws have this little backyard with about a quarter acre of grass. Like we could just put them out there and all this stuff. Ha ha, big joke. And we just moved on. You know, it was just like one of those things you talk about as a family, like you're just messing around. Well, my brother-in-law, Rob, my wife's brother, kind of disappears from the room. He comes back like 10 minutes later and he goes, "Oh, hey guys, I just ordered those 50 chicks that we were talking about." And we were like talking about something else at that point. And we're like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" You know? And he's like, "Oh yeah, I just went online. Like there was this place where we could order them. And so they'll be here in 2 weeks." And we're like, "Dude, no, we were not like, that wasn't like a thing, you know?" And lo and behold, these 50 little tiny baby chicks show up 2 weeks later. And we'd never, gone to school for this or read about how to do it or anything. We were just kind of big fans of what Joel Salatin was doing out in Virginia. And so we copied his thing to the T. We'd literally walk around with his book, like, all right, what do we do in this situation or whatever? And I remember the very first time we harvested the birds, it was like, we'd never done it before and we didn't have anybody to show us. So there was like a chicken inside of a traffic cone, like attached to a tree. And then we had an iPad next to it with Joel Salatin doing like a YouTube demo. And we were just like, all right, I guess we're going to figure this out. And that's pretty much how Pasturebird and Primal Pastures, our other company, was born. And it was just we wanted better food for our family. We didn't really think it would ever turn into a business. It was just going to be a little hobby in the background. And me and my wife were living in Newport Beach at the time. And I was an accountant and she still is an interior designer. And we were just like living this pretty normal life. And that seemed like it was the path. But I don't know. I think like God had other plans for us,
Definitely. I mean, we were in major need of normal people deciding to get out there and make some quality chicken. And it's been a problem for such a long time for so many people. Like you said, like you couldn't find it. You can't find 100% pasture-raised chickens anywhere. And it seemed like the egg quality was ratcheting up, but we weren't seeing the chicken protein quality increase at all. And so Can you talk to me a little bit about like how you took care of yourself? Obviously you got Lyme disease, you're looking for high quality proteins. You have this crazy idea to start a chicken farm that you didn't think was actually going to come to fruition, but apparently Rob had other plans. You had tours in Iraq and you were going abroad. Like when you would go abroad and you didn't have that high quality food, like what were you doing? What were you relying on? And when you would come back, was it almost like a reminder of how you really needed to take care of yourself?
So the crazy thing is in Iraq, we were really lucky in a certain way because we lived with the Iraqi army. So like our whole job was we were supposed to get in there, live with about 400 Iraqi soldiers and like train them to be able to operate independently. So we were on this really forward deployed base. It was only 10 of us with 400 of them. We were like outside of the wire all the time. So it was kind of sketchy, but at the same time, we didn't like eat chow hall meals or any of the MREs or the stuff that you've heard of. Like we would order local food, So we would eat like, I remember when we first got there, they greeted us with the ceremonial meal of a sheep's head. So they bring out a sheep's head, it's like baked. And they're like, oh, special guests, they get the eyeballs and the tongue. And I was kind of like into that stuff by then. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, kind of weird too, but also kind of cool. But we would eat really fresh fish and we would eat really good, like home cooked rice. And I actually felt like we ate amazing in Iraq. And the food there is so, so good if you eat the authentic local food. And that's been my experience. We've got to travel a ton. I think me and my wife have probably traveled to like 40 or 50 countries now. And when you go a little bit deeper beyond like the tourist food, there's so many fun traditions and just ancient kind of wise traditions in food that you get to take part of. And even for somebody like me who avoids grains generally, and I'm like not a big bread guy at home, in Iraq when it's made fresh from locally milled fresh wheat. And it's like in Italy, I've just felt like I've been able to tolerate a lot more of the, glutens and breads kind of, and it's also digested in a different way, and you walk a lot more, and you're a lot more active. So no, I think our travels have like really set us up to think, all right, America's amazing in a lot of ways. I love our country, but like the food thing, we might be the worst at it. We might actually have the worst food in the world. And I know it's plentiful and there's plenty of calories, but from a nutrient standpoint, I don't know. I don't know that we're doing so hot.
Definitely. We're definitely in a place where exactly what you said, we're serving up calories without the nutrient density, and we're seeing the aftermath of that from deficiencies across the board. And when you see the newest, recommendations coming out, I mean, it's just laughable in the last few weeks, just the charts, frosted mini wheats and Lucky Charms coming in, and it's more nutrient dense and a more healthful option than eggs, grass-fed meat, and milk. I mean, it's scary, the money and the funding behind big business to be able to promote and influence in the way that they are. And it takes us so far away from just the traditional way of eating. The things you're talking about, going to other countries, even, as a serviceman, even working, and teaching the Iraqi army how to be independent and take care of themselves, to eat their food and to feel good and to eat things you are not used to eating. I mean, that's why I'm so obsessed with what you've done and want to like shout it from the rooftops and share it, because it needs to be a success story here. We need people to get behind companies, especially in the regenerative farming space, really because of what it's doing for the planet and what it's doing for each of us, the nutrient density that we're getting from the animal. So can you talk a little bit about regenerative farming? What happens? I want you to go through from the barren dirt of the land you purchased when it was a potato farm to what it takes to build a regenerative farm and what that means for us and, the protein that we're eating.
Yeah. I mean, so much of this is like things that are maybe not our parents, but are definitely our great grandparents or great great grandparents understood inherently. And if you look at like indigenous wisdom, the stuff that we're talking about regenerative is like not new, but I grew up in downtown Seattle. I've always been, a camper and a hiker, and I've loved the outdoors. And so all the narrative that I heard my whole life was like, if you love the environment, you want to take care of the environment, then what you need to do is just eat less meat or eat no meat. That would be like the gold standard. That's just what I was fed my whole life. And so I always felt a little bit of guilt with it. And like, just, I don't know, it never really set right being a meat eater and somebody who loved the environment at the same time. And I just operated in that space for like many years. And then what really attracted me to Joel Salatin, who's, if you don't know him, he's this really well-known kind of grandfather of American regenerative ag out of the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And he's just really effective communicator. And so he was the first one to really explain. He goes, look, go back 200 years. Like animals and plants work in synthesis with each other. That's the way they're meant to, at least. Maybe not in our modern agricultural system, but if you go back, look at the bison, right? So one of the big fallacies is that we have way too many cows in the US. And actually, if you go back and you look at the bison in our country 500 years ago, they numbered about 80 million head. The current number of cows in the US number about 80 million head, maybe 90 million. So it's like, well, wait a minute. This country, this space, like supported the same number of animals that it is now. So how is that possible? And were the bison just degrading the land every single year? No way. Like you go into the Midwest and that ground that grows the amazing, corn and soybeans that we've like converted into this kind of gnarly industrial monocrop. The reason that soil is so black and rich and healthy is because bison were on it for millions of years. Yeah. Eating the grass, pooping on the ground, fertilizing it, moving on, letting the ground rest. Like it's this beautiful, plants feed animals, but animals feed plants. And so the idea of regenerative is really just this idea that like animals can be a benefit to the environment. But the big difference of the 80 million cows now and the 80 million bison before is like, how are we managing them? Right. So now we have what's called like CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, feedlots, grow houses, stationary pig barns, where the big difference, what we've changed is that animals are all 99.999% of our livestock animals are stationary now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very big difference from those bison that were herds that were like grazing and moving all around. Now our animals are like living in one place. So what that means is they eat, they poop, and they kind of sleep all in the same area.
Ugh.
Well, now the power of that manure and that movement and the hoof action in the soil, like that's pretty much gone, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So now they've quickly gone from being an asset to the environment to being this huge liability. If you
Mm-hmm.
look at the dairy barns or the pig barns, especially, they have to basically pump that. And I'm not trying to overly, sensationalize this, but this is really what happens. Like they have to take the poop out of those houses and put it somewhere. So
Mm-hmm.
they generally they're going to put it into what's called a lagoon. A
Yeah.
lagoon's like a big pond of manure. And
Yeah.
when it rains a lot and they get flooding, that manure pond is going to flow into the local rivers, the local waterways. It's going to have these big algae blooms and fish kills. Even if they are trying to responsibly spray it onto what they call like spray fields, well, they're oversaturating the spray fields or contaminating the groundwater, like the wells in that area are all getting messed up. So it's really like we've lost kind of the art of moving animals.
Yeah.
Nomadic people understand this too. That's why those tribes always had to be moving all the time because they were like following the livestock, that they had to have
Right.
camps in different areas of their region. So they really understood that. So we're like, you know, I don't know, 75 years into this experiment of keeping animals in one place. To me, it seems like it's not going that well,
Yeah.
Like there's some room for improvement there and we need to get back to moving animals across the grassland. But that's a long answer for like regenerative ag really just means that we can use animals to improve the soil over time.
Right.
And it's not just animals, it can be done with plants as well. So we talk a lot about factory farming.
Mhm.
Well, factory farming, you can factory farm kale, corn, and cattle. So it's not like a plant versus animal thing. I
Right.
totally reject the idea that like if we want to do better by the environment, we need to eat less meat. Well, we need
Right.
to just eat less degenerative food. We need to
Right.
eat more regenerative food. You can do kale and carrots in a regenerative way, and you can do cattle and poultry in a regenerative way. But it represents about 0.1% of the overall market right now. So it's a very hard to find niche, small subset that needs to grow.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you brought up just the monocropping of specific plants because I don't think people realize, unless you're watching a documentary like Kiss the Ground, following the Savory Institute, and checking in on brands like, or following like Rome Ranch and Force of Nature. We met at the Regenerative Farming Conference, which it's kind of a cool place to meet.
Down by
You're
the
like,
river, Austin, Hill
we're,
Country. Yeah.
yeah, we're in Hill Country, Fredericksburg. But it is, I mean, people don't even realize it's like you're growing soybeans, you're growing corn, you're milling that land, you're ripping up the soil every single year. There's no roots there. There's runoff. That water is not, it's not making its way deep into the soil. The microorganisms are depleting. It's like it's basically the microbiome of our gut in the soil, and it's totally destroyed, which is changing the mineral content. It's changing the nutrient content of that soil, which decreases the nutrient content in the plants that you're eating. So when you're like, oh, my grandma's orange had 100% of the, daily vitamin C, and now they're saying that it's less than 10%. I mean, these stats are real because the soil is hurting.
Yeah, that's where it comes full circle. I think as a farmer, we geek out on our soil health and carbon sequestration and water holding capacity and like biodiversity and wildlife on the farm. Like all these things are so cool to me, but I think where the rubber hits the road is the nutrient density of the food. That healthy soil literally produces healthier food. So I think that's where, the soccer mom that's got 4 kids and like doesn't have time to go to the farmer's market and everything else, like that's where it gets really important to them because everybody wants to feed their children and themselves, the healthiest food that they can kind of afford. And so that's where it became Pasturebird's mission, or it's like, okay, the farmer's market's great, all these like small local food, like it's all great. But I had a hard time because for, 3-4 years, we were producing this beautiful pasture-raised, all this great product, nutrient dense. We were measuring the nutrient density and it was like 10 times higher on a lot of things like what you're saying, because the birds are eating grasses and bugs and seeds and worms and flowers and weeds, not just corn and soybeans their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
But what was a bummer to me is like, we didn't really grow up with a lot of money. My parents were super busy. They both worked full time. We had sports all the time. So it was like, I felt like I was starting to produce a product that my parents wouldn't really have had access to. From a price standpoint, where it was like, okay, this is super cool, but it's 5-6 times more expensive than even organic in the store. So that already prices a lot of people out. But then B, like the convenience, most people are just not going to go do the majority of their shopping like at a farmer's market. And still, you have a lot of people that don't really want to just order all their meat online. Like they just want to go to the grocery store and pick up their food and have it be done. So the goal of Pasturebird really became like in 2015, it was like, okay, if we think regenerative is really that big and that important and we need to do something about it, we need to focus on accessibility and affordability because that's the two things that are like really holding back regenerative food right now is that you can't really find them anywhere. And when you do, it's so expensive that most people can't afford it, even as like a sacrifice kind of thing. So we got really geeked out about what do we need to do to bring down the cost and to put it into grocery stores where regular people are,
Right. Can we talk about the first generation of Pasturebird and the tractor system and why the birds would be so much more expensive and what new technology you're using to bring down the price? And if people don't know, you're at Sprouts, you've done it. So giving away the punchline, but it's so exciting to have you. I mean, to get a box from you is phenomenal for my family. If Sprouts is near you and that's the grocery store you shop at, Pasturebird is there and at a price that meets families' needs. So I'm freaking so stoked that you did this.
No, it's cool.
So
we're only in 3 regions of Sprouts so far. We're in the Southeast and we're in Phoenix, but we're definitely eyeballing trying to be in California Sprouts pretty soon because that's I've felt like Sprouts, Whole Foods is great. My family shops there when we can, all that stuff. Local health food store, that's great too. But Sprouts is Sprouts and Pasturebird feel like they're on the same wavelength. It's like Sprouts is reasonably priced. They're sharp on their margins. They have some organics, but they all have a lot of conventional food too. And so it's like they've dominated in pasture-raised eggs for a long time. They've done really well. So it feels like a good spot for this brand. It's definitely a cool fit. But the reason why we're able to do it, so you back up, we've talked about Joel Salatin a few times, which is fine because he's like our mentor and our inspiration for what we're doing. But he kind of teaches this 80 to 100 bird system. And it's something you can build with things that are lying around the farm. So it's like a little 10-foot by 12-foot coop. It has a little pull handle on it. And the idea with the coop is it has no floor on it and that you move it every day. So the birds are protected from predators and all that stuff. But they also get to live on pasture 24/7. So they're foraging for all the food on the ground. They get the supplemental feed. Then they poop on the ground and then they move to the next spot, manually. So in that system, we did that for like 3 years. So, me or one of my brothers-in-law, they walk out, grab that handle and pull every single coop every single day. And you think about 80 birds, it sounds like a lot, but in the chicken world, it's nothing, So we had like 50 of these at one point. Takes about 15 minutes to service every single one of them. And so you're like out there all day long, just pulling chicken tractors. And we believed in it. It was fine in the beginning, but it was like, if we want to be accessible and affordable, the comparison of that is like free range and organic, which is a 600-foot long barn, 40-foot wide with 24,000 birds inside of it. You don't have to move it. You don't even have to feed the birds because you just take a tractor and you drop their feed in and the augers just take it out to the birds. So we were 100x inefficient on labor. So I was like, all right, we got to figure something out here. So then we moved up to the second generation, which you saw on the farm, which was like a 600 bird system. And it was still manual, but at least now that 15 minutes, you're servicing 600 birds. So we would pull it with a tractor instead of with, by hand. The water was a little more automated. The feed, we still have to go bring it in every day. And the movement was all still totally manual. So instead of being 100x on labor, now we're like 20x on labor, and we built about 70 of those on our 165 acres. And it was like, okay, it's getting better, but this can't be the end state, And we've always been big on we can't reject the technological advancements that big ag has made. So how do we take the best. That auger system, that's pretty cool in my opinion. Like, I don't think the chickens really care if we're feeding them by hand with a bucket or if their feed is being automatically deployed via auger system. So how do we take the best from kind of that conventional? Yeah. What's up?
So for people that don't know, what is an auger system?
Oh, sorry. Auger is like a screw drill that basically takes feed and it pushes it through a pipe and it drops it into feeders automatically. So instead of like taking buckets and filling up each one, actually, if you're on video, you can see right behind me, these red things are the chicken feeders. So they're feeding off of that and then they eat the pasture as well. So that's what an auger system is. So we're like, all right, how do we take the augers, the climate control? One of the big things is like, we had no climate control in the manual system. So every day, if it starts to get warm, you got to go around every one of those 70 coops and manually like roll up or roll down the sides. So how do we take all the best stuff from kind of the conventional free range organic stationary model and then put that into like a mobile system? And so in San Diego, 2017, we just started geeking out on this idea of like, all right, let's make a 6,000 bird system, which is still a quarter of the industry size, but it's like healthy. 6,000 is a lot of chickens. That's what you're looking at right behind me, about 6,000 birds. And how do we build a system that will actually drive itself? So instead of every day, we got to take a tractor and we got to pull it and all that stuff. Like, let's figure out an autonomous movement. Well, to do autonomous movement out in a big open field on undulating terrain, like that's kind of a engineering challenge. So we brought on some super smart people. We actually ended up working with Jet Propulsion Labs, which is like a division of NASA. And all right, how do we drive this huge, there's never been, we're the largest, we're going for the Guinness World Record of like the largest electric land vehicle that's ever been made, because we're 7,500 square foot, basically a mansion just driving to fresh pasture every day.
Yeah.
We had to use solar power too, because we're out in like these remote areas. We can't run like a 2-mile extension cord or something. So we had to put solar power on all the coops, 20 electric drive motors. And it's basically this huge greenhouse that has no floor on it. So chickens, unlike cattle, they can't just be put out in an open field. You have hawks, eagles, owls, too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry. They really need to be protected. And if you look at chickens in the wild too, like they're staying under a bush, they're hiding out in the shade. Like they don't like being exposed out in the elements all day like that. So with our system, it's basically like a portable shade structure that gives them protection from the elements and protection from predators, but gives them that like ideal life spent on pasture. So we just figured out the design. We called it the automated range coop, and kind of like built our first prototype. We finished it about 2018. And it was just this great feeling when, you walk in and you just push a button and the thing just drives itself to a fresh spot of pasture. And it was like, oh my gosh, I think this is a game changing invention. And we didn't get it to where we're 1-to-1 on labor, but we're like 3-to-1 on labor probably now.
Yeah.
Which really puts us within striking distance of, we'll never be the cheapest chicken. We're not going to be a $5 Costco whole chicken ever. Yeah. But we are able to produce under the organic price, which like a lot of people that care about health and they care about wellness, like they're buying certified organic chicken in the store, which I think was kind of the best you could before. But we're able to slide in either at or a little bit below that organic price with a pasture-raised, non-GMO, like a really, really great product. And that's something I'm really proud of. Like that's been a big part of the goal. That's why the tech is really important. It's like, how do we get the cost down? How do we produce in this way that's good for the environment, really nutrient dense, all this stuff, but get it like within striking distance for families,
Absolutely. I mean, just touring the farm myself with our family, it looked like such a simple, clean, like modern system. And I know how much work went into prototyping and figuring out how you were going to make it work, but you see the benefit. You see the benefit on the land. You see the benefit in the birds, like going into the coop. It felt open. They had space. They're running around. Like the kids are getting to like pet and pick up the chickens. It's like, it's very, it feels 100% like just the healthiest way to raise chickens. And I'd love for you to talk about, I know you sort of mentioned like water retention into soil health, biodiversity. When we were there, you talked about the different grasses and, I think like keeping away, bugs or certain bad weeds, like where people would spray. What are you guys doing differently, and how are you using the land to your advantage?
Yeah, I mean, like we're all about biodiversity because the chickens thrive on a bunch of different species of grasses. So I think we've counted like 36 different species of grasses, weeds, wildflowers, legumes, which is like clover and stuff like that. And we welcome all of it. So we would never spray to try to kill off, whatever the West calls weeds, because the chickens actually thrive on that stuff. And if you're on video, you can look in the screen behind me and you can watch how they're foraging. And they're actually such intelligent creatures that know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big part of our, health plan, where in a confined environment where it's stationary and maybe they have a bit of access to the outdoors, but that doesn't mean what a lot of people think it means. There's in that stationary environment, they're still spending 99 to 100% of their life inside.
Mm-hmm.
If they start to come down with a little cold or a little flu or something, I mean, these chickens and all livestock actually, they like understand how to go eat different species of grasses. They can pick up some of the dirt. They can kind of dust bathe. They can do, fresh air goes a long way. Sunshine goes a long way for fighting off disease. We just don't get those issues. The birds get to go and select lots of different plants. A lot of it's medicinal, and they know what that is, even if we don't. They get to go jump in the sun or jump in the shade, and it's always fresh air. Like you notice when you walk in, you definitely you smell the farm, but if you've ever been close to like a conventional poultry house where you have those 24,000 birds in the same place all the time, I mean, it does not smell like that. We were able to kind of walk in, hang out. The kids are playing, they're playing on the ground and stuff like that. It's a very clean environment for raising poultry because the birds are moving all the time. So it's not going to have that smell. It's not going to have that dirty kind of gross, really it's just a gross environment.
Right. And that's the gross environment that leads to viruses and sick birds. And your motto is bugs, not drugs.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like traditional farming and what they do when they encounter these type of issues?
Yeah, but I also don't ever want to be the guy that's like, we are the only right way or something like that. Not. I just think we're trying to be really transparent about what we're doing. And like I always say, I have nothing but respect for anybody who tries to grow food. And like a lot of these people are the best people I've ever met. They just happen to, their grandpa started in conventional poultry and now their dad does it. Now they do it. And it's like, they see the flaws in it, but they also point out some flaws with our system. It's like, it is more expensive to do it our way. It does take more land we could talk about that later. I actually think it doesn't take as much land, but it depends on how you measure it. But yeah, I mean, in a conventional environment, right? So you've got 24,000 birds living in the same place every single day. You can use your imagination for what that looks like, what that smells like. To take that system to free range, all you do is you open up, a few doors on the side every day. Mm-hmm. Maybe not, but they need some version of outdoor access. Mm-hmm. And the misnomer, the false conception is that like you open the door and these birds just flood out to this big lush green pasture. Yeah. Like that's not what happens, Yeah.
I've seen it firsthand. And they hang out inside. They want to be safe.
They're prey animals, right? So what we just talked about, they're not cows, they're not dogs. They're not going to like run into a big open field. They're going to pretty much stay where their food, water, and shade and their buddies are at. Mm-hmm. Do they pop their head outside? Yeah, sure. Is outdoor access better than not outdoor access? Totally. Like I'm not trying to argue that, but maybe it's like 1% better,
Right.
And if you take that same system, you do organic. I love organics. I believe in them. I believe in what the whole purpose of organic was when it was founded 20, 30 years ago. I think it's moved a long way away from that, to be honest. Mm-hmm. You take that same kind of 24,000 bird system and you swap out the corn and soybeans to where they're organic, certified organic corn and soybeans, largely imported. Mm-hmm. That becomes organic free range chicken. And it's like, well, I don't think that that's really what the founders of organic meant. when they set up the standards like 30 years ago. It was 24,000 birds in a barn, but they're eating certified organic, monocrop corn and soybeans. So then they're good to go. So we just felt like it left a lot to be desired. And we get the question all the time, like, why don't you guys do organic? The organic feed is super expensive and it's also largely imported, and it's really hard to trace, like, is this really organic or is it not? There's also a lot of pesticides and herbicide allowed under certified organic now. So it's not necessarily always what people think it is. But to me, it was going to make our product so much more expensive and not necessarily give like the value that I think people are really looking for, which is all of our pastures are 100% organic. We've never sprayed anything on them. We never had to use anything. So the birds are living in this killer environment. To me, it speaks much more to like the spirit of what organics was meant to be, but Definitely. We can do it at a price that's less, so that just felt like the right fit for us. But I always say, if you want pasture-raised and organic, there are 900 other farms out there doing what we call true pasture-raised, which means moving the animals to fresh pasture, at least a few times a week. So go find somebody in your backyard. Like, we're all about the movement, not just our company. We help build getrealchicken.com. So that on there you can go and you can filter for your area and what kind of feed type you're looking for and all that. You can find somebody locally. Like, Pasturebird really just exists to fill the void of, the large scale grocery store. We just felt like it should have a pasture-raised option in there. Like, you have it for eggs, you have it for beef, you have it for all these other proteins. Like, why is there no pasture-raised meat chickens in grocery? And so that really became our mission,
Right. Well, the nutrient density of them eating the bugs, all the different types of grasses, the worms, all the things they're getting, the seeds, all the things they're getting their hands on outside of the feed that they're being fed supplementally. Like, I just think about the nutrient density there and what it's giving back to the land and the carbon sequestration that's happening. So can you talk about why regenerative farming is so important for the planet's health?
Yeah, I mean, carbon's come into big focus. That's just one of like 10 reasons why regenerative is really important, though. But carbon is one of the reasons. So we have 3 times as much carbon in the air as what we used to, and we have a third of the carbon that was in the soil that we used to, because we've really like tilled the ground. We've depleted. We've had all this runoff. We've had a lot of stuff happen in the last 70 years of modern industrial ag here in the U.S. that's released carbon from the ground, which is where it belongs, and it's put it up in the atmosphere. And so what regenerative does is it builds all these little tiny carbon receptors, which people don't realize, but grass and plants are the best carbon capture system in the world. MIT's like $50 billion invested in these carbon capture, fancy, crazy technological systems. And now a lot of scientists are going, wait, grasslands do all this and more. They also feed livestock, but they do all this amazing stuff. So what a piece of, grass or a plant or any kind of a flower does is it actually literally reaches up, it attaches to carbon in the atmosphere, and it slowly sinks it back down into the root, and it stores it down there. So that's really the idea of like carbon sequestration. Is plants are amazing at this. And so if you look out at the Midwest, where we used to have, rolling pastures with grass that was, the Native Americans talk about, like, you could tie a knot with grass over a horse's back. So it was like 10, 12 foot tall grass in the prairies before we tilled it all up and planted corn and soybeans, like, you can imagine how much carbon that's capturing all the time.
Right.
It's pretty amazing, but that's just one piece of why regenerative is super important. Another one is the water holding capacity. So this is one that's not talked about as much, but it's really important somewhere like California, where, somehow right now in Sacramento, they've declared a state of emergency for 2 things: drought and flood at the same time. So what the heck? How does that happen? It's because we've depleted our soil. And so it rains 8 inches, but we can only capture a half inch before it's all running off into the stream and the river. So it's like we've done a lot of damage. And with organic matter, which is the measure of soil health, every time you increase by 1%, this is kind of soil dork stuff, but every time you increase it by 1%, you can capture 25,000 gallons in every single acre. So we started with less than 1% organic matter on our little slice of the world, and we've brought it up to 3%. And we're on 165 acres. So if you do the math and you take it over like 8 storms that happen on a normal year, we capture about 10 million gallons more water that stays on our farm, and it recharges the aquifer than we would have if it was still in potatoes. Like 10 million gallons, that's a lot of water, you know? And that's just our
Wow.
little tiny slice of the world on 165 acres. So you can imagine if 10% of farms adopted like cover crops and regenerative and animal integration and all the regenerative practices, like what that would do for actually keeping water where it belongs instead of just having it run back off to the ocean. So it's not always like this climate change. Oh, we're not getting the rain that we used to. Like, look what's happening in Sacramento now. We're getting tons of rain. We're just not able to keep any of it, you know? So it's
Right.
almost less relevant how much rain you get is how much you can actually keep. So that's a
Right.
big regenerative too. And then the last one, not the last, but the last one that I think is really cool is biodiversity. So we used to, you go to like an industrial, and this is where I kind of do critique the monocrop world a lot. Like you go out to an industrial monocrop field, that could be corn and soy, like the classic offenders, but it could also be kale or spinach. And you look out, it's 100 acres of one plant, you know, one plant the whole time. Like that's not supporting wildlife. That's not supporting important insects. It's not supporting the bees. The bees are the one that come into full view and everybody talks about, but like bees are just one of a million different really important insects that like supports life on our planet. So the more we do this monocropping thing, the less we support earthworms and ladybugs and, squirrels and rabbits. And so I talk a lot about like, I think we all want to do as little harm as possible. And that's a noble thing that we should go for. And we talk about like, okay, well, killing animals is bad, or you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be eating meat because you have to kill animals. Well, let's talk about pesticides for a second. Because you go out to that 100-acre kale field and you apply one round of pesticide. Like to me, a cow is super important, but so is a caterpillar. And so is an
Yeah.
earthworm. So it's like, you wouldn't believe the billions of animals that are going to die. A pesticide that's meant to kill small animals on that farm.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I just think we all probably have blood on our hands. And like, instead of the last 10 or 20 years, which is do as little harm as possible, I'm excited and encouraged and like hopeful about this idea of like, okay, let's do as much good as possible. Like let's reframe this to where it's like, we're humans. Like we can actually be a benefit. We can steward animals. We can steward plants. We can like do this regenerative thing in a way that's actually really positive and provides a lot of hope instead of just trying to be as least bad as we can.
Right. Well, it gives me the chills just thinking about our tour at Pasturebird Farm with our family because you see it firsthand. The land is beautiful. It's so calming.
Mhm.
It's like feels temperature controlled almost because
Totally.
the ground cover, you see, these chickens that are being raised in a healthy environment. Your kids are running around, like these solar powered coops are moving like just to see it like a full length. Okay. You have this huge, I want people to picture it. It's like a huge field of a number of different grasses, 36, you
Yeah.
quoted 36 different types of species. And you just picture these coops moving one full length every day across this land. And then you have the cows that graze and they're basically mowing the grass so that the
Right.
chickens aren't walking into grass above their head every day. And it's this just beautiful ecosystem where the animals are there. And we talked about too, like you've seen the return of other animals, talking about, kale farms that are, or spinach farms that are sprayed with a bunch of pesticides. You've seen the return of a number of different species to the land. Can you talk about that too?
Yeah. I mean, we have resident bald eagles that live there all the time. That's like so cool. I'd never even really seen a bald eagle in the wild before, but they live there. We have deer that have returned, mountain lions, bobcats, so many coyotes, which, if we
Yeah,
didn't have the
problem for
mobile
you.
coop, no, I mean, luckily, like with the mobile coops, that's the whole point. It keeps them where we want them on the farm. They're chasing, the rabbits and the squirrels and the gophers and the stuff that we want them. And then when we have, mortality, which is like dead chickens, because
Mhm.
anywhere you go, you're going to have, a few dead chickens every day. We bring them over to the area where we know the coyotes are at. They get to eat that. It's like a very fair exchange. They're not attacking in our coops or something like that. But no, so much wildlife. And you were there, I think you were there kind of November, something like that. When did you come
out? It was October. It was
October.
Like,
okay,
yeah.
So that's a good time to come. Yeah, but I mean, different times of the year, you have an enormous amount of insect life and bug life. And like if you come out in a month or two from now when the flowers start to bloom, I mean, the bees are just humming out there, you know? You can like hear it anywhere you walk. It's like this low level just murmur. And I think it's amazing, you know? We're supporting so much more than just cattle and chicken. Like it's this whole ecosystem. And now one thing really exciting what we're doing in Georgia more than here is we're integrating on crop farms. So it's really trying to bring the whole thing full circle where it's like, okay, we're able to heal all this soil and we're able to do all this, you know, fertilizing and bring life and vitality back to the soil. So basically the model is we're going on 1,000-acre farms in Georgia where they're growing whatever, you know, in Georgia, it's like a lot of cotton, peanuts, wheat, corn, like those types of crops. So now instead of having to use synthetic fertilizer, we come in, we take over like 200 acres out of their 1,000. We put our chickens on for 2 or 3 years, cover crop, they graze, they recharge the soil, they do all this really cool stuff. And then after that 2 or 3 year period, we move to a new 200 acres. And then they come in behind us and they plant their corn and their, you know, peanuts and their cotton and all this stuff. And they get to take advantage of all that nutrient that we put down. So to me, that's like the really exciting future is the reintegration of crops and animals together.
Yeah.
Again, indigenous people would have thought, wait, what? You guys don't know how to do that? Like we've done that forever. Like that's not a new idea.
Yeah.
But for us here in America and in the West, we've really detached our crops from our animals. And it's like this crazy thing that I just can't wrap my head around. At least with poultry, I kind of understand because with a stationary house, it's really hard to integrate that to a field. But like with beef cattle, you know, we have this great opportunity to use animals in a way to build soil, to basically close the loop with the crop system that I think is the future of food. Like I think that's the next 10 years is this reconnection, reintegration of crops and animals to where it's a regenerative closed loop system. And I'm like, that's a cool future to fight for, you know?
Yeah. And I think what you've done and been such a maverick in the chicken farming industry is that you've made it easier for people. Like where looking back at when you started, when you had to manually do everything and pull every coop and the people are looking for a proof of concept outside of an 80 to 100 chicken coop. Like you're able to show them you can do a fourth of what conventional farming does. You can improve the land quality and the biodiversity and the nutrient density. You can meet the price point. Like for a lot of people, dreaming and manifesting and seeing that future is so far off and so hard. It's hard to take on that problem, that environmental problem, the world problem. And you've moved the needle to a place where people can feel really inspired. And you're doing it in Georgia now with integrating plants. And I think, you know, that really gives people hope. And it shows other farmers that maybe are in a conventional space that this is an option for them. And it can be an affordable, competitive option. I think that's the hardest part with farmers, like being at the Regenerative Agriculture Conference, and we learned the suicide rate of farmers and the depression rate of farmers. Like, you know, that's really overwhelming to have these careers, whether it be your past life in the Marine Corps and there's PTSD and there's trauma, or you're in the farming industry and you're not making ends meet and you have this land and every month it's month to month and you're continually being kind of like asked to be more and more affordable and it's unsustainable for your land and for your family. Like these are the things that need to change. You know, we need to be able to support people who are going through hard times like this. And you're giving so much hope to so many farmers. And I just want people to know about your mission, and I want them to know about your companies. And if they're a farmer, I want them to call you or go on your website or YouTube and figure out how to do this themselves, because it is the future. And it is so critical for our own health to have these nutrients so that our immune system works, so that we can fight viruses and disease, so that we can feel our best. Like if we're all here like half healthy, it's like, how can you're not going to have the motivation, the drive, the follow through, the resilience to like make any change here.
Totally. No, you summed it up beautifully. I mean, I think that's the exact point. And it's like the best thing about regenerative to me is it gives a hopeful and positive outlook to what the future of food can look like, instead of just this doom and gloom bummer, plant-based everything, eating crickets. Like, I don't
Cranking
know.
foods. Yeah.
Can't we like aspire towards greatness? I mean, nature's shown us the template. Like, I think that we deep down inherently know what we need to know. And the craziest part of this is I think regular people are going to have to lead the charge, because what's happened is, and this is not a knock, I'm sure there's great people out there, but some of the most kind of virulent like resistance that we get is from people with animal science degrees and plant science degrees, and they've spent 30 years kind of developing, vaccines and drugs for animals and all this stuff, and they like hate what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, I love most farmers that I meet, but it's really hard when you've spent multiple generations doing things a certain way. It's really hard to start doing things in a different way.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to need fresh perspectives and creative, thoughtful people. And part of me is like, the plant-based bubble's like bursting, but I can't wait to get some of those really smart young people over to the regenerative side, because we need the best and brightest. Like, we're kind of figuring out with chicken. Well, guess what? There's 900 other food groups out there that like need massive innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would welcome 10 other competitors in the chicken space, because I just think it's just ripe for innovation right now. And like, this whole world is called biomimicry technology. And it's the idea that like, oh, okay, maybe we should acknowledge that actually nature is really, really smart and really wise. Mm-hmm. And we should build tech that replicates that wisdom, instead of trying to fight nature and cram it into our box. Like, what if we just looked at nature as the template, and then we try to build systems that leverage all that wisdom? Because there's so much that we don't even know yet,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We talk about nutrient density. I don't know what nutrients to exactly measure. I don't know how the billion different nutrients interact with each other or permeate with each other, or how that works. Like, we have so much to learn still within that space, and how soil health affects, animal health and immune system health and all this stuff. Like, we pretend that we know everything. We don't yet, but we need like super smart, young, we need women, we need veterans, we need like all different walks of life, and people just come in and provide perspective and like get involved with food, because I really think this is like the golden age for regenerative, and people are starting to wake up to it. And I think we can build a really rad future. Like, we can leave it better for our kids, and that's a cool opportunity.
You're definitely leaving a legacy, Paul. It's really cool to watch. And I think, what's even so inspiring is to see how you and Lindsay have integrated not even just regenerative farming, but just wellness and health into everything in your family. I'd love, for people just to get to know you just for a few minutes here at the end, a little bit more personally, about what you guys, what are some of your health hacks? How are you taking care of each other? What are you prioritizing? Like, what do you think is the most important thing for your family and for your kids?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I mean, family is like everything for us. That's how we started. And I have like the workaholic tendency, and my wife's amazing at like, okay, let's rein it back every once in a while. We've got 4 little ones. So we've got 9, 6, 4, and 2. And,
they're so cute.
Yeah, well, yeah, so are yours. They're actually in the background of this video right now if you're watching too. But, I didn't grow up on a farm at all. I didn't grow up in this way. So it's been so cool to watch them be able to grow up in that way. We definitely still, I wouldn't really call it paleo, but I guess it is more or less. It's like a paleo style that we eat at home. We've raised all the kids that way. It's really easy for us because they've never had a lot of like junk food. They've never had candy, a lot of these things that like people, I feel like, really struggle with to try to get a kid off of that once they're on it. got an amazing tribe of people between our church here, like in Temecula. We live in a medium-sized town, like 100,000 people, and we're just really into the community out here. And so we've just got like a really rich kind of friend and tribe group that a lot of us generally try to eat the same way and try to take care of our bodies and like think about things the same way. During COVID, we got really bummed that basically our first grader was asked to be on Zoom like 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
And we just weren't interested in doing that. So we pulled him out and we hired a tutor for about 10 kids from the class. And that became what was called, like other people were doing it, they called it pod. So we called our thing a pod. And we just did school in a garage for the year. And we thought, all right, this will just be a temporary fix to like what's going on. It ended up being the best year ever, and the kids thrived. And the teacher was like, oh my gosh, if I could teach like this would be like the dream, 10 kids, no standardized testing, no, ideology that I've got to cram down their throats or anything like that. So then the next year we did it, it turned into 3 classes. And then this year that we're in right now, it's like 6 classes in this kind of pod independent. So they're technically homeschooling, but they go to a place every day, 4 days a week from like 9 to 2. And they have a tutor and they have their friend group. And that's just been a really rich thing for us too. It's just amazing families and like the feeling of health freedom, which is always really scary in California. If you don't align exactly with what they want, they want you to put in your kids' bodies or different things, like, you kind of have to, or you got to move. So It felt like a really sustainable way for us to stay here in California and just these great families and lots of different walks of life. But I think everybody's aligned around this idea of like, no, we can take control. Like we don't have to accept the options that are necessarily out there. Like we can pave our own little path. And I think we've got a huge family here in Temecula. So there's like 13 cousins, I think. We used to live all on the same street. Now we all like just live in the same town. But it's really great having a lot of family close too. My mom moved down from Seattle. My wife's whole family is out here. And then really important to us has been the local church too. I mean, I don't think that there's anything that can like underestimate the importance of having a relationship with Jesus and like really dedicating your life to something other than yourself. That's been a huge source of like hope and inspiration for us for sure. And then travel too. We've been super fortunate. For the first 8 years of the business, we couldn't travel at all. We were like stuck doing chores every day, pulling chicken tractors. But as we've been able to grow the team and get the business healthy financially and all that stuff, the last 2 years we've been able to travel for a month. So we just loaded all 4 kids up. We went to Italy last time. And kind of like, it's amazing that you can work from Zoom a lot now and do all that. So we were able to go over there, kind of do the Airbnb thing, like rent a van, cruise around to about 10 different cities in Italy and like, hang out all day and then jump on work at night kind of thing. And like, I don't know, it was really, really special to bring the kids for that kind of a trip for a month. And then last year we were able to do England and Scotland and France and Belgium and the Netherlands and Ireland. Same thing, about a month, which is just works a lot better when you're traveling with a bunch of little kids and trying to do a little 7-day out and back that's like chaotic and psycho and sightseeing and all that stuff. So we just pretty much get a house for a few days and a van and, try to just enjoy it. Yeah, just actually be there a little bit. And I think Americans suck at traveling in general. Like everywhere else, they travel for at least a month everywhere they go.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, we have 7 days off. Like, let's go run over there. So that's been super fun. I don't think we're going to be able to keep doing that forever. But that's been really, really special. And traveling to me just opens up your eyes to, Temecula is not the only place in the world. California is not the only place. The US isn't the only place. Like there's lots of, especially within Regenerative, there's lots of amazing stuff happening in Europe and in Israel and in Africa. And like, I don't know, it's just very inspiring and eye-opening and humbling to be able to travel with your kids and let them see that too,
Yeah. I wanted people to get to know that side of you just because I think for me personally, I'm so inspired by your priorities and the way that you've been able to have boundaries to create
a world for your children and for your family that honors your values, just to know what's most important in your family, your faith, their experience here on earth, and that it doesn't, everything that I think you've done has been showing that hard stuff, that you can do hard things. Like you can do hard things. Like you can be in the Marines, you can get bit by a tick, you can get Lyme disease, you can be an accountant who decides to start a regenerative farm when the world is kind of stacked against you in that space. You can come up against a pandemic where, everyone felt like really overwhelmed by the change in the school system, and you can find the silver lining and build something differently. I think what you've shown in your life, in your career as, as a business owner, as the head of your household, the dad, is that what you want is possible and you can build it. You just got to put your head down and have the drive to do it. And it's so inspiring for me as, as an entrepreneur and as a mom to say, like, I don't have to compromise if I don't like what's happening in the school system. And I don't have to compromise if I don't like what's happening in the health system. And I don't have to compromise. And it feels hard. It feels scary. It feels like, oh, how am I going to change this? How am I going to fix this? But it's conversations. It's what you said. It's the families that you go to church with. It's your tribe, your community, the people that care about the way that you guys eat, having those conversations with your community and your friends, finding the people that are on the same page with you, and then getting excited and motivated to create change. And you've done it all throughout your life. And I just think you're such an awesome dude. And I'm so glad you were here.
Oh, super sweet. Thank you. My dad, one of the things I think he just gave me a superpower, like the thing he did, I just remember him saying all the time, it was like, you can do whatever you want, like whatever you put your mind to, like you can do it, and I don't know why, I believe that from a young age. And so I always try to remember to tell my kids that, because I don't know, like, I don't know how we feel like we need to define success by money or different things all the time. But I really think that we should empower our kids to think and believe and give them the tools to you're exactly what you said. You don't always have to compromise. Sometimes you do. Don't get me wrong. I feel like we have to sometimes too, but you don't always have to. You don't always have to accept the status quo. Like you can try something at honestly fairly low risk a lot of times, even though we think it's scary, we think it's crazy. Look, if the pod thing wouldn't have worked out, guess what? We go back to public school the next year. We figure out something else. It's not actually as risky as what we think it is sometimes. So I think that's always it's empowering for me to think like you do have license to try things. We live in this amazing country with honestly one of the best support systems in the world. We got lots of flaws, but there's also a lot of benefits to being here. Like you could try a lot of things and still be okay,
Right. Well, you're giving everybody the hope and the motivation to get out there and try something different. Yeah. Cool. And you've given us such a great option for pasture-raised chicken. Our family loves it. We're so thankful for you. I'm going to throw a promo in intro. And you mentioned a website where people can find chicken that it's Eat Real Chicken. What is it?
GetRealChicken.com.
GetRealChicken.com.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I mean, order Pasturebird.com. We'll ship to your house and all that. But even better than that, if you can find somebody local to you, that's way better, to be honest. I mean, we're in this for the movement, not just for our own company. Of course, we're happy to ship you a box as well. Like, I think we have some of the best stuff. You can get our stuff at Sprouts. And if you're in Southern California, or anywhere in California, a lot of the health food stores are starting to carry Pasturebird. But if you're not, please do check out Get Real Chicken and support somebody local to you. That's like what it's all about,
So awesome. Thanks for your time, Paul. It's been so fun to talk to you. And I'm excited for people to really start to understand this movement.
Thank you, Kelly. Good talking to you.